This is Mrs. Miller, your teacher at ELA Academy. Today, I'm going to model good annotating practices with Chapter 6 of Their Eyes Were Watching God, a novel by Zora Neale Hurston. I'm assuming that you've read the novel at least through Chapter 6, so if you haven't, you might want to go do that before watching. Since there's so much to talk about in this chapter, this demo is split into a 3-part series. All of my quotes and page numbers come from this version of the book. If you still need a copy, this QR code will take you straight to it on barnesandnoble.com. You might also find it at your local used bookshop. In previous annotation demos for summer reading, I focused on the first chapter or scene and looked at a variety of annotation types. This demo will look a little different. I chose Chapter 6 of this novel because it deals with several of the important issues and symbols in the story. I've grouped my annotations into 6 categories: how the men of Janie's community court women and treat their wives, Matt Bonner's mule, the vultures, Janie's head rag, and Janie and Jody's marriage. Each video will cover 2 categories. Let's get started. Somewhere in the middle of this chapter, we have a scene that deals with how men in Janie's community court women. Let's look at the first quote. The men make a pushing, shoving show of gallantry. They all beg the girls to just buy anything they can think of. And look how they praise Daisy and vow to take care of her. They promise to buy her things like railroad trains and steamships. So, what does this behavior suggest to us? It shows that these men believe you win a woman's heart by promising to spend money on her. They don't actually spend money in this scene, they just promise to. They imply that they will value a woman, well, as long as she's pretty. They'll put her on a pedestal and shower her with worshipful offerings like they would for a goddess. Basically, it's a promise that if she accepts one of them, they will treat her very well. But even in this scene, we can see that the men aren't serious about showering a woman with expensive gifts. The girls and everybody know it's not courtship, it's acting out courtship, and everybody is in the play. So in our annotation, we might point out that everyone knows this behavior is a big joke. Not just one to laugh at while they're playing around, but a true irony, because the married men in this novel treat their wives exactly the opposite, as we'll see next. We already saw earlier in the book how Logan treated Janie, but let's see what appears in this chapter juxtaposed with the big flirting scene. Janie, as a proper mayor's wife, was expected to cook every meal perfectly. But one day, when the bread didn't rise and the fish wasn't quite done at the bone and the rice was scorched, Jody slapped Janie until she had a ringing sound in her ears. Remember how Jody promised that he would treat Janie much better than Logan ever did? It looks like he's forgotten this promise. He's abusing Janie for making simple mistakes, like ruining one dinner or not knowing where something is kept in the store. This sure doesn't sound like the previous slide. But is it just Jody? Well, remember the part where Mrs. Robbins begs for food? Look more closely at how the men respond. Tony, her husband, won't never hit her. He says beating women is just like stepping on baby chickens. He claims 'tain't no place on a woman to hit. Joe Lindsay said with scornful disapproval, but I'd kill a baby just born this morning for a thing like that. All the other men present agree they would kill a wife for embarrassing them in public like Mrs. Robbins did. Now, of course I suspect they wouldn't actually kill her, but they might beat her up. Look at what Jody did to Janie just for messing up dinner. Also notice that Joe says Tony loves her too much. Maybe none of them loves a woman at all. Like Jody, they chase after a wife for what she can do for them, not because they love her and want to be best friends and soulmates. They certainly don't seem to consider women to be the equals of men. Look at how even Tony, who doesn't want to beat his wife, compares women to baby chickens. Jody takes it a step further than Tony. He says, somebody got to think for women and children and chickens and cows. God, they sure don't think none for themselves. How well do you think this attitude would fly in modern American society? It seems to be at the root of all the troubles between men and women in this community, particularly between Janie and Jody. Jody treats Janie like she doesn't have a brain in her head, and of course Janie doesn't like that, and either fights back directly or expresses her unhappiness in other ways. Jody is saying that women and children are no smarter than animals, and he's implying that they're property just like the animals. How ironic! This is one of the same arguments for slavery from people who believed that those of African descent weren't any smarter than animals. Now, supposedly, slavery is over, but it looks like the African American wife in this novel is still treated like a slave by her husband, with a total lack of respect and equality. That's it for part 1. In part 2, we'll tackle a couple of the important symbols in this chapter, Matt Bonner's mule and the vultures. See you then!